Hello, it's Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies, My Emotional Audit, and all things to do with emotional healing, trauma release, and generally well-being. And today I want to do a book review. And the book I'm looking at is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, subtitled How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures, which it appears they do all three. And this is a very important book. Merlin is the son of Rupert Sheldrake, who may be known to some of you as the inventor, if you like, of morphogenetic theory, the idea that there are morphogenetic fields in living organisms that kind of help it to self-learn. It's quite an esoteric theory, but he's a very important scientist. And Merlin is his son, who's a mycologist. And I'm sure it helps a lot having a famous father when you're pitching an idea. But this is a really good book. It starts off rather oddly. I have to say, the first, I think it was the introduction. I was thinking, did he write this? There are clues, I think, to the fact he did, but something appears to have been added that just feels like it isn't natural English. There were several moments where I had to reread a sentence and think, that actually isn't the right phrase. That doesn't make any sense. So it could be that was missed in the editing. But anyway, it's a small point really. The remainder of the book is very, very good. And actually, although this is a massive, because this is a hardback library copy, and so you can see how thick it is. Actually, I think the paperback version would be a lot easier to read, and I will be getting that. I always try and support local libraries if I can, and so I tend to get them first that way. And if I really like them, I'll buy them. So this is one I'm probably going to buy. And yeah, it develops into a theory really of how fungi lie at the heart of life, biology in particular. In fact, they made possible, I guess you could say, life on Earth because they're the only organism that can break down rock. And therefore, in evolutionary terms, they enabled plants to come out from the seas, single cell plants like algae, to creep onto the land and start to create soil. So they're very important from that point of view. They also highlight a very important conundrum in biology at the moment. We know of Darwin's theory of evolution, which was designed during the Victorian era of the machine age. And the idea was that it was competitive. Evolution was a competitive thing, and it was the survival of the fittest, really. And now what we're seeing as we increase our ability to look within and find smaller and smaller component parts of things, we now see that perhaps there's more of a cooperative frame in which we can view how organisms live together in ecosystems or communities. But we don't want to go too far and say that all life is altruistic. That would be probably an anthropomorphic addition to saying, we all need to live in harmony, but that isn't quite how nature works. It's very much a combination, I would say, or he uses a lovely term, an alloy of competitiveness and cooperation. And fungi really illustrate that so beautifully because they lie at the heart really of connectivity between plants, inorganic soils, us, because they live within and with on us in the form of yeasts, and really they make essential connections between things. So most people understand fungi as being involved in rotting, in degradation, and that's a very important part of what they do for us. Without them, we wouldn't be able to exist because we'd be knee deep in organic rotting material. Not to mention human bodies as well, because they break us down quite nicely as well. But we have to understand that fungi are mostly invisible. The fruiting body, which we call the mushroom, is only a tiny part of the fungus, And in fact, fungi exist in myriad forms, but the most common form is the mycelial form, which spreads as a sort of network of veins almost under the soil. And it links things. It's a sort of nutrient transport network. And some have likened it to a wood wide web, like the internet analogy, which is quite clever. But I would also say it's very akin to the neurons in our brain and how connections, the process of connectivity, is more important than the structure itself. And so it's a process, not a thing. You could say the same of the brain is a process, not a thing. It happens to consist of, fatty matter, but it's what is the brain doing? It's making connections all day, every day, over and over. And so it's really the mycelial network which does that for the soil. And it doesn't only transport nutrients, it actually transports information, and it can feed back upon itself. Because if you imagine it has a series of sort of hyphae, these are the sort of filamental threads, the tips of the filaments, which are able to sense what's ahead, and they make connections where they overlap. And if they find an area that is less advantageous to them, they will pull back and feed back information to retract that degree of growth and develop it in a new direction where maybe conditions are more favorable. Now, we have thought that it's a chemical transformation, a chemical transport, if you like. And there is some degree of chemistry involved. Organic compounds, we know, travel along there. Bacteria travel along there. Probably some viruses as well. But it's also thought that maybe it's an electrical network, which is a very brand new thought and hasn't really been developed. At least when he wrote this book in 2020, it was a brand new area, the idea of electrical transportation. We're finding that more and more in systems that we had previously thought of as chemical, that the body uses both. It uses chemistry, but it also uses kind of propulsion waves or electrochemistry to make fast connections. So fungi then have this ability to make connections in networks, and what they can do is promote kind of plant growth by enabling a symbiotic relationship between the plant and the fungus. So the fungus is able to break down compounds in the soil and provide organic compounds, and in return, the plant is able to photosynthesize and feed the fungi. And it's this sort of dual role or symbiotic relationship that enables plants and fungi to coexist. But it's not as simple as saying fungi make plants able to survive, because it's a two-way street, and we have to stop thinking of it in terms of it's only there to support plants. It's definitely a mutual endeavor. And he talks a lot actually about specific groupings, and he spent quite a lot of time on lichens, because lichens are a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae. And it used to be thought that was it. You just had those two together, and that was what a lichen was. And certainly till the recent discovery that actually there are more than two. There's more than an algae and a fungus. There's also prokaryotes of all kinds. They're organisms that don't have a nuclear membrane. It's a biological difference that doesn't impact many people, but it's a community, and I think that's the really important thing to understand. A lichen is not one organism, and so it brings into question the whole idea of identity and singularity. I wrote a book in 2015 about the microbiome. I called it The World Within, and because at the time, actually 2017, get it right, at the time, the microbiome was really being discovered, and the idea that the human organism is not an I, it's a we. We are composed of more microbes than we are human cells, at least 5 to 10 times. And in terms of the DNA component, it's more like 500 times is microbial. So it shatters the whole notion that we are unique, identifiable, individual organisms. And I think fungi really illustrate that beautifully too. And lichens are an example, but there are many others. It's really very important to understand that the fungal network, the mycelium, is not just a passive pipeline, if you like, that just sort of transports and shuttles things around. It makes decisions. It makes decisions about where to go and how to connect and what's needed. And it will even trade carbon compounds depending on the exchange rate at the time. I thought that was so interesting, like money and looking at exchange trading, which I'm also interested in. It's like you basically you buy low and sell high. That's well known in forex trading. Well, apparently that's what mycelial networks do as well. So I thought that was really fascinating. And they kind of enable this kind of active decision making or participation in growth and development. They are brokers of entanglement, he says, hence the title. Brokers of entanglement. What a wonderful, wonderful phrase. And I started to get quite excited by his language. They make the notion that this complex community can actually coexist with each other and learn from each other. And so I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful term. Plants grow faster when they have the appropriate fungal association. And you can demonstrate that in the lab, or you can even demonstrate it in nature by cutting plants off from their fungal partners, and they tend to not do as well. They can't provide as many nutrients. Now, we know also that plants will support each other via the mycelial network. And this has, as I said, been simplified to a wood wide web, which was a term. I'm not sure who coined it. Was it Suzanne Simard? But she was a Canadian scientist who looked at it first, actually, before it was taken on by Thomas Wolfenden. Was that his name? I can't remember, who wrote the book about the language of trees. But she was doing it first. And it's a very interesting notion, actually, that this kind of network of plants is not all equal, right? Older, bigger plants tend to command more interconnections, very much like, I guess, the web does. All right, if you have a popular website, it will draw a lot more people to it because there's more connections, and more connections tend to attract more connections because of the way web bots and spiders work and discover who's looking at what, and they tend to promote things that are popular. It's so very similar in the mycelial network. And if you cut out some of the biggest trees that have the biggest nodes, that are the most well connected, everything tends to suffer a lot more. And unfortunately, that's what we do when we log old growth forests and we take out the biggest trees and we leave the younger ones, thinking that that's more ecological, perhaps, but not necessarily. It actually destroys the ecosystem because larger trees are almost keystone species, if you like. They have a lot more influence on what happens within that wood wide web. So it's all about flexibility, I guess, flexibility, learning, self-learning, and the idea of selectivity. So you can create a flexible, selective communication network that helps the ecosystem adapt to whatever is going on. Now, we know that we're in the middle of significant ecosystem collapse right now. Now, this isn't the first one. This is about the sixth, if it does occur. One of the most famous was the asteroid impact that actually created such a dust storm that it cut out the sun, and that's, we believe, how the dinosaurs were made extinct, because all the plants that they fed on died. And obviously plants are what most animals feed on, the smaller ones, and even the carnivores have to eat animals that eat plants. And so it eradicated the dinosaurs. Guess what survived? Once the plants had gone, and the animals had gone. Well, bacteria certainly survived, but so did fungi. And we have found some fossilized remnants of these enormous sort of columns of fungi that were meters and meters, tens of meters high, which seemed to dominate the landscape. But they were very busy creating the next iteration of life on Earth, I think. And so it's a fascinating story, that what fungi do for us. And he's not really touching on any of the psychological stuff, magic mushrooms, for instance, or some of the cultural uses of mushrooms. He does touch on medicinal mushrooms and their use in Chinese medicine, but he's more looking, I suppose, because his background is biological and evolutionary, he's more looking at that. The last chapter, Radical Mycology, very interesting. He interviews Paul Stamets, goes and visits him, goes on a mushroom weekend. You know, he's looking at the evangelists for the mushroom movement, of which Paul Stamets is a very good example, but he's not the only one, who basically believe that mushrooms will save the world. Fungi in particular, obviously I'm using mushrooms as a generic term, which isn't quite correct. It should be more fungi, because they will do everything from remediate waste, like old cigarettes, oil spills, glyphosate toxicity in kind of agricultural waste. And they will also replace some of the materials that don't decompose, plastics, polyurethane, all manner of furnishing, fabrics, shoes, clothes. You can make everything from mycelium. And he talks about some very important developments, companies throughout the world that are using fungal products to kind of replace the things that we are finding very, very difficult to decompose, to get rid of. He even talks about fungi proliferating in areas of nuclear devastation, and with nuclear waste. And so that could be a future way of dealing with nuclear waste if we decide to go, well, we are going down the nuclear route, certainly in the UK again. But if we decide to carry on going down that route, I hope we don't, because I think there are better routes to energy production than something that takes so long to decompose. But there are fungi that will live on irradiated material. So it's an extraordinary story. He talks a lot about classification, because that's a big discussion in biology. Are fungi a separate kingdom, or are they an offshoot? Where did they come? I think that's an important discussion that could be developed further, but it's not one that is my sort of interest. And his really is more to do with particular forms of fungi and their interrelationships. That's where he's coming from. It is a beautifully written book. First chapter, or was it the introduction aside, it's very, very good. Quite remarkable, and not a difficult book to read. You know, you can get through it, unlike some of the books I've got. You can get through it in a week or two. I dare say you could read it over a weekend if that's all you did, but I've got other things as well. And it's one I would highly recommend. So well done, Merlin. I'm going to be probably quoting some of it when I write my own, which is ongoing, and certainly using some of his ideas, which I think are very, very important. So look out for that. That's hopefully should be this year sometime. Mushroom medicine, might be calling it that. I'm not sure. I'll have to research if anyone else has created a title of that. But that is the provisional title. But it's something I just am very passionate about, because I do think we need creative solutions to where we are. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves. Next week, by the way, I'm interviewing a colleague who I have talked with before, Dr. Rainer Viehweger, and we're going to be covering some really important new information about kind of the energetic component of life. He's just such an intelligent and erudite, multi-talented person who knows a lot about quantum physics, but he's able to put it over in a very understandable way. and he adapts it particularly to biological systems. So I can't wait for our conversation next week. So I'll be posting that. Look out for it. Take care then. Bye for now. Bye-bye.